My name is Hervé Florent, and I serve as an evangelist here with the Mission Point Christian Church. I want to say a special welcome to all of our Mission Point members and anyone else viewing around the world. It's good to be here together this morning. I'm excited about sharing some things that I've learned over the years during still times. We are living through a very challenging time on our planet. The COVID-19 coronavirus is circling the globe, affecting young and old, rich and poor, men and women, and from every tribe, nation, people, and language. To counter and spread the halt of this virus, the very biblical solution of social isolation and social distancing has been imposed in many parts of the world. And this was indeed one of God's ways of dealing with disease and of teaching his people how to deal with disease. And so we've been asked to stay at home. We've been asked to stay safe. In essence, we've been asked to be still. And I want to read Psalm 46, verse 10, which says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations, and I will be exalted in the earth." Be still, God says. And I have to admit that for me, being still has always been a challenge. It's not really in my nature. Growing up, I was always moving and running around and jumping around. And that's why when my mother grounded me, it was a very painful but effective way of disciplining me. Matter of fact, one summer, she grounded me for the entire summer because I had lied to her about my grades and I tried to deceive her. Well, needless to say, my grades went up after that, and I never tried that again. And so God has indeed forced me to be still several times in my life. There have been many times where I have been just too busy to know that he is God and to exalt him and not myself among the nations and among those around me. And maybe the same has been true for you. Some of the times that this has happened to me, one was in 1989. I was on the mission field. I got sick with hepatitis A, and I spent 2.5 months in bed. Another time was in 2009, where I broke both knees playing basketball. And I spent several months at home recovering and learning to walk again. Another 2 times, it was 2016 and 2018 respectively. I had both hips replaced, once again requiring several months of recovery at home. And so I'd like to share with you today some lessons I've learned in times of stillness. And I've entitled the lesson, Lessons in the Stillness. So let's read together in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 16 and 17, and read the words of the Apostle Paul to the church in Thessalonica. In verse 16, it says, "Rejoice always." Verse 17, Paul says, "Pray continually." And in verse 18, Paul says, "Give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus." And so when God is saying, "Be still," what I've learned to do is follow Paul's directives here. Number 1, rejoice always. When I'm asked to be still, my first instinct is not to just comply, but my first instinct is to complain. It's to grumble. It's to blame others. And in truth, I've done my fair share of that throughout my life, and I'm sure you have too. But what we need to know is that that's not God's will for us. God's will for me is not to be a complainer. No, on the contrary, he wants me to learn how to rejoice always. And what better way to learn how to rejoice always than in hard times? So I've asked myself over the years, so all that complaining that I did, was that helpful? Did I enjoy that? Did that feel good? Of course it didn't. And when you complain, does it feel good? Are you happy? Have you ever heard anyone come to you and say, "Hey, I just spent the whole day complaining and I feel great now"? That doesn't happen. No one feels that way. And God does not want us to feel that way either. But for me, I always felt better after I chose to rejoice rather than complain, and chose to know that God is God. And that really is the root of learning how to rejoice. It's not the circumstances that determine whether I rejoice, but it is my being rooted in God that decides whether I rejoice or not. Now, this takes practice. And so one of the things that I've had to do over the years is learn to think about things that bring me joy. Aspects of God, of his character. I think about his love. I think about his goodness. His creation. I love his creation. I think about the mountains. I think about oceans. I think about sunrises and sunsets. These things bring me joy. Singing songs, music bring me joy. You can think about a person that brings you joy, whatever it is, but it's going to take training and it's going to take practice to learn how to rejoice always. And so for me, I needed to be still to find joy in God and not in my circumstances. Number 2, pray continually. Back in 1989, when I had hepatitis A, I didn't pray for the first 3 weeks of my illness. I was angry and I felt hurt by God and that God would do this to me. And so one night I finally broke down, surrendered, and I began to pray. 2 hours later, I had finally learned what it meant to pray with loud cries and tears, as it says that Jesus did his whole life on earth in Hebrews chapter 5. The great evangelist George Mueller, the 19th century evangelist, said this about prayer. He said, "Prayer, the pouring out of my soul before God, must become my method of breaking Satan's hold on my life in the hours of battle." And that's what prayer was for me that night. The battle, you see, wasn't the disease, but it was against my own pride, stubbornness, selfishness, and my own sense of self-importance. My life was too much about me and not enough about him, who will be exalted among the nations and who will be exalted in the earth. I needed to know that he is God, and I needed to exalt him in prayer. And so prayer changes you. It changed me. Prayer frees us. It calms us and it strengthens us. See, but I needed to be still to learn to pray and draw near to the Father in hard times and really in all times. And so I pray that during this time, you can use this time of trial to pray continually. Pray together. Pray with your roommates. Pray with your family. My wife Janet and I, we have recommitted to praying together every single day. Use Zoom, use Skype, use FaceTime, anything to be able to connect with other people. Even though we can't touch each other, we can still pray for and with one another. And finally, number 3, give thanks in all circumstances. You know, after all my surgeries, I had so many questions. Would I ever walk again? Would I ever dance again? And I love to dance. Would I ever play basketball again with my kids? These were all unknowns at the time and that I worried about, and it caused me actually a great deal of anxiety and fear. And I know that the unknowns of today are causing many of us a great deal of anxiety and fear. Let me share this with you. We have a lot to be thankful for. We really do. In the stillness, I was able to see more, to notice more, and thus I could find so much more for which to be thankful. For example, during my recoveries, my wife Janet was amazing. My children, Daniel, Sahai, David, Sierra, they were fantastic. They were patient, they were gentle, they were serving, they were compassionate, and they were kind. And these are things that I might not have noticed about them had God not forced me to be still. Because sometimes, you know, when you're running around and you're so busy, and even if, quote unquote, you're doing the Lord's work, you can still be too busy to see what is right in front of you and to learn to be thankful. And so I am grateful for the times when God has called me to be still. Now, let me leave you with one more quote from George Mueller. He wrote, "When all is exceedingly dark, and when I am overwhelmed with grief and despair from looking at outward appearances, I must seek encouragement in God's almighty power, his unchangeable love, and his infinite wisdom." The outward appearances right now are dire, but we must seek encouragement in God's almighty power, his unchangeable love, and his infinite wisdom. No one really knows why this is all happening. No one knows what God's plan really is, but we can use this stillness to know that he is God, to exalt him among the nations, in our homes and amongst our families, by rejoicing always, praying continually, and giving thanks in all circumstances. Because we may not know why God is doing what's happening around us and what he really wants, but we do know that he wants us, that this is his will for us in Christ Jesus. And so I pray that this week you can rejoice, you can pray continually, you can be thankful in all circumstances, and that this is a tremendous week for you, for your family, and for all those around you. And so in closing, I say stay home, stay safe, and may God bless you.